Well, good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us this morning for this morning's One Sioux Falls media briefing. One of our favorite media briefings of the year, where we get to reflect back on the city's growth in building permit numbers, in population numbers, and just how our community grew over the past year. This is the last year I get to do this as I look towards the kind of final 4 months of my term here. So I'm going to kick things off, share some numbers, and I'm going to turn it over to our Director of Planning and Development Services, Jeff Eckhoff, to go into some specifics of some housing numbers, some commercial development numbers, and then I'll close it out with kind of just some insights more globally over the last 7 or 8 years. 2025 actually ended up on a fairly high note last year. We finished with a little north of $1.3 billion in construction valuation. As you can see, that's the second highest construction valuation total we've seen in the history of the city. After a really large 2022, and 2025 was driven by a couple large commercial projects, which we'll talk about in a bit. It's our fifth straight year that we've been over $1 billion in building permits. Of the total permits issued on the next slide, you'll actually see that it was a low year from a total number of permits issued, just over 5,600 permits issued. That was primarily due to some residential softening. We didn't see as many residential permits last year than we normally see, but we did see some large commercial permits. So that's what drove those total valuations up that you saw on the previous slide. What people often like to know is where do we sit from a population standpoint? And so our new population numbers, last year we ended the year at 219,588,000. We added a little north of 5,000 residents this year, so we're now at 224,676. So we will begin updating our slides today, our signs in the community to reflect these new population numbers. So didn't quite get to 225,000, but that's about a 2.3% increase over last year. And that's about where we've been hanging out, is around that 2.5% mark. That obviously compounds on a bigger number every year. And so we're trending back to normal, still hovering around the 5,000 new residents per year. And we're going to talk a little bit about what it takes to sustain and maintain a population base that's now hovering at a 250,000 people just in Sioux Falls proper, and then we'll look at the MSA here in a little bit. So with that, I'm going to ask Jeff Eckhoff, Director of Planning and Development Services, to come up and dive into the numbers behind that population increase a little bit. So Jeff, come on up.
Thanks, Mayor, and good morning, and thank you for being here. Do we have a clicker? Or?
No clicker?
They'll do it. Okay, right. So I'm going to talk a bit through the 2025 numbers and kind of break down the population or the building permit numbers that the mayor talked about, and then I'm going to kind of move into kind of a a look back over the last over his entire term. But first of all, as you mentioned, we had added almost 2,000 units. Living units to the city. That includes apartments, single-family, townhomes, that type of thing. It was a lower year for single-family residential, which there's a lot of things going on with the market. I think there's still price, interest rates. We still have a lot of people in those low 3% mortgages that aren't moving out yet, so supply is down. And there's some waiting going on, I think, too, with regards to what's going to happen in the market when interest rates continue to drop. But I would remind the group that 357 is single family. If you combine that with the 403 of what we call the primarily townhomes, those still represent home ownership. And in some respect, I think as we're looking down the road, home ownership for young people today really might be more of a townhome or condo, or more of a place to start than a full single family home that we traditionally have thought of. The next slide talks about multifamily. Again, we came off a real peak, and we'll talk a little bit more specifically about 22, 21, and what happened in those years as we look back. But again, we kind of returned to that almost 11, 1,200, which is really a more normal number for multifamily that we usually see. Again, you go to single family, again, you see that drop off. A lot of that's happened since 21. That was post-COVID when we saw that price spike. And so we did have probably the lowest number we've had for some time in single family home ownership or single family building permits. There's also a lot of inventory and stock from past years that's driving some of those lower numbers as well. We talked about the dollar valuation. Again, that reflects the focus on commercial also affects somewhat or reflects somewhat it's still somewhat high price of materials and cost of homes. Townhome units, I think that's something that's really interesting. Again, you'd really consider that as part of home ownership. So when you lump that together with a single family, that number has stayed fairly consistent through time, whereas the single family has dropped, which again I think kind of illustrates that new path perhaps for single family homeowners. And then the dollar amount kind of reflects that as well. So let's talk about commercial for a second. The next slide shows. It's interesting, we always kind of track the large projects. We kind of track the number of projects that are $10 million or more. This is the top 10 projects that we had in 2025. Represents a nice mix. There's some manufacturing, there's some healthcare in there, there's one city project, an apartment projects, and the one interesting to me was Central Church, which was a $19 million. And then some higher ed stuff too, with the Metro Center and then the airport expansion. So just a really nice mix of amenities, a nice mix of business, a nice mix of public infrastructure projects in that. Whenever we see that type of mix and it's not all in one sector, that's always a good sign to us of a healthy and growing and diversified economy. If you look back, I think we had, I can't remember the number, we had about 16 projects or so over $10 million. But we kind of run in that, I'd say 12 to 16 a year that are over $10 million. If you look back to 22, and we'll talk about that again, we had like 39 that year. So it's kind of, 22 was such an anomaly year. At this point, you kind of look back, so what happened in 25? I think a lot, again, what you're seeing here, costs certainly were in the discussion. Absorption of multifamily. If you look at that, remember those high years we had in 21, 22, 23, where we we permitted over 7,000 multifamily units. That's a cycle where there's building, and then high occupancy, and then there's building, and there's absorption. That's kind of what we started to see this year, is finally some absorption from those large projects. In 26, a lot of people, of course, want to know what we think is going to happen in 26. And what we're hearing, we're seeing a couple projects that are good size that are in the queue right now. When you talk to banks, you talk to engineering companies, you talk to architects, it's a little bit slower start, but they really are starting to see their pipeline fill up for the second half of next year. So I think, again, always barring what can happen at the national level, I do think we're going to see a pretty good year again next year, but it's going to be a little bit slower start than traditional. Let's take a look now at the next slide on building permits, just kind of a historical look at that. And this is what I like to call the Tenhaken total. If you look at the body of work of the last eight years, I think it's fair to say we've had unprecedented growth both in building valuation, building permits, and certainly in population as well. And so we're going to kind of break down that and look at the trends in that, and also kind of talk about what those totals look like. So the top line, the blue line, is the total. And the green line underneath that is commercial. So you'll see how commercial really followed the trend of the total. Remembering too that apartments are counted as commercial in the commercial permits. And then the bottom line is the residential. And you see that being the single family being much more. You can see how it's flatter and how it went down and now it's starting to trend up just a little bit. The next slide talks about what truly is the Tenhaken total. If you look at the total building permits in the 8 years of his office, there were $9 billion worth of building permits that were pulled during that time. 6.5 of that was in commercial, and then understand of that 6.5, I'd say 1.5 to 1.6 are apartments, and then almost $2.5 billion in residential construction during his time period. Specifically, let's take a look at housing and what that looks like and what that trend looks like. And again, you see the total in the blue line, and then you see the commercial that follows it again, like we saw before, being in the apartments of it, multifamily, and then we see the trend of single family that's gone down, and then also with townhomes, and other includes townhomes and duplexes. What's interesting about that is if you look at where we were in 2018, you look where we are at 2025, we kind of returned to trend from where we've been. But the anomaly of 2022 is in there where we permitted over 4,300 units, housing units that year. Again, 33 of those were multifamily, and so that really kind of threw that skew in there. If you look at the population numbers, you'll also see that's when we had spikes in population as well. And then finally, you look at the housing and the total, what happened during that time, the number of housing units during the Tenhaken term, over 20,000 units of housing. And so if you take that 20,000, and you take it roughly by 2.2 or 3 people, which is kind of the average that we look at, kind of equates to those 40,000 people that we saw that have been the total population growth since the time that the mayor took office. And so a lot of people ask us about, are we growing too fast? Do we have the capacity for that? As you've seen between our infrastructure and our thoughtful planning, and we're going through finishing up the comprehensive plan now, the market answers that call. They've built the units that kind of support the amount of population growth that we've had, and will continue to do so in the future as long as we provide a good path and provide the infrastructure and well thought out planning that we've always done. So, but those are the statistics on that, and with that, I'll turn it back to the mayor to close it out. Thank you.
Don't go anywhere. Yeah, here's why, because he's going to be retiring in a couple months, so this is also his last briefing here too on this. So I hate that you call this the Tenhaken total, because it's his department that's handled a lion's share of the growth of this community. So it's certainly a we game, and so permitting all this and the inspections and all that, it's a we game, and you know that, man. So it's been a lot of work to keep up with all that growth. So
I was much taller.
yeah, you were. Yeah. Yeah. But I want to close with just this graphic. And you maybe have seen this graphic like ad nauseum over the last 8 years, but this graphic has really been central to the growth of our community, to the growth of our administration. And this is where the phrase "One Sioux Falls" comes from. At the center of this graphic, obviously, is the term "One Sioux Falls," but as you go outward, you look at the core tenets of our administration, which has really been utilized to determine what we have to focus on to keep up with this level of growth. And around the core is public safety and the health of the community had to remain a focus. The housing, and making sure housing remained as accessible and attainable as possible. Man, is there ways I wish we could have done better on that? For sure. Housing and keeping housing costs low is extremely challenging. I just was on a call with the folks from Bloomberg Harvard yesterday on that. That continues to be the number one challenge that mayors across the country are wrestling with. Workforce and the workforce demands. How many times have we led the nation in unemployment over the last 8 years with our historically low unemployment? And then kids and families. It's why we've fought tooth and nail for aquatics bonds and for rec trail expansions and things for kids, because kids and families have to have communities where they feel safe and where they want to live in and where they want to stay in. And then around the outside of that, none of that can happen if you're not doing it and delivering those services in an innovative way, if you're not engaging people in the process, and if you're not keeping an eye on the sustainability of the growth, the wastewater, the streets, the transit, all the things you need just to keep the trains running on time. So that has been a building block of how we have grown the city over the last 8 years. So roughly $9 billion in residential and commercial building growth through the last 8 years. And that has been, hard to keep up with, adding 42,000 people during our tenure. Another way to look at it, we've added about half a Rapid City since I took office. We've added about 3 peers since I took office. So if you think about the infrastructure to maintain a pier, South Dakota, we added 3 of those over the last 8 years. And so kudos to the team in the city of Sioux Falls that's had to wrestle with that and make that work. From 2020, this is a stat that I think is really important, especially as we enter into the first real day of the legislative session today, the first full day, and they look at appropriations and where to put budgets and focuses on property taxes and so forth. From 2020 to 2024, our state grew by 4%, but Sioux Falls grew by 12%, right? So the state is growing, but Sioux Falls, this metro, is really growing. And so we have to really keep that in mind from a state perspective as well when we look at where we're appropriating resources and dollars and funds, that a lot of the growth we're seeing in the state is happening in this corner. And we see that that projection and this population growth to continue. You know, by 2030, our projections will be around 250,000, that number. By 2050, we expect that number to be around 360,000. And the MSA, our metro statistical area, you know, our 4-county MSA, to be right around half a million people. And so smart growth, the 2050 plan that we're looking at adopting here, those are all very intentional efforts to make sure that the things within that framework that we keep up to make sure we're delivering the services effectively, efficiently, and in a cost-friendly manner to our residents. And so it's imperative, you know, we just continue to look at economic development opportunities as we do this too. It's getting expensive to deliver services to a community like this. So part of what we're tasked with as leaders in this city, in this community, is ways to continue to grow and expand our tax base so that we can continue to bring in the dollars, the tax revenue, to support another 5,000 to 6,000 people every year that need schools, that need ambulances, that need health care, that need police services, that need new fire stations. And so that's one of the things we're tasked with, Jeff's team's tasked with, and that I hope the next administration really keeps a laser focus on that economic development piece as well, because it's very, very important to the future of our community. So it's an exciting time in Sioux Falls, and I went and got my hair cut 2 nights ago, and the same lady's been cutting my hair at Great Clips for like 10 years, and she made me pull out a picture of what I looked like 8 years ago, and I looked really different. There was no gray hair, and so that number has put a lot of gray hairs on this head, but they have been worth it. So we would certainly take any questions you guys have right now on the growth of our city.
You mentioned residential growth, economic growth. We have a finite amount of space in the city of Sioux Falls. What's the residential growth going to look like in 10, 20 years? Are we going up more, and are people going to see more condos type home ownership, that kind of thing?
Thank you for that question, Ray. So I understand where you're coming from on the finite amount of space, but so we're always looking ahead. Our utility department's we're taking 100-year looks at where we can be. And so in the southeast part of town, there's about another 8,000 acres that's being brought to maturation now with some lift stations and some work that they're doing. They did a northeast sewer study that has about another 15,000 acres identified up there for growth. And then on the west side, there's an almost unlimited amount of growth because of the way the topography falls. They just advanced Basin 15 with a lift station and some equalization basins. I think that's another 3,300, 3,500 acres. And so you've got 20-some thousand acres just that are being matured and brought into this now, in addition to the acres that are already available within the city. When you look at that at 100-year and you look at the studies they've done, there's a footprint there that actually could represent twice the footprint we have now, which is about 85 square miles. So right, you have to put the infrastructure in the cost of that, but as far as the land goes, we do have that. Now, with that said, we obviously take a look at ways to be more conservative, more efficient with our land that we have, but the space is certainly there.
I remember when I was campaigning, the question always came up about density and like, how are we building residential units to become a more dense city instead of, because it costs a lot to sprawl. We got to put in all the infrastructure. All the infrastructure's here already. And if you think about over the last 8 years, how much more dense our downtown has got in terms of living units, DTSF would probably have the stats, but the number of living units that we've added in the core of our city over the last 8 years, if you think of the projects that we've added to create more density in our core, it's pretty substantial. So we're getting there. The market has to demand it as well. We're still a community that loves 3-stall garages and half-acre lots, and so as long as the market keeps demanding that, the builders will keep building that. But we are seeing a shift towards an urban lifestyle, and that's why you've seen some of the projects you've seen over the years that have went up. So
you mentioned the legislature. About a year ago or so, about this time, I asked you what's the one thing the legislature can do for the city of Sioux Falls. That the pressure to answer that, to find that answer, is greater with every year. In this session, given everything that's happened, what's the one thing that the legislature could do for Sioux Falls to deal with this growth and continue to prosper?
You know, I think kind of just touching on it there at the end is just continue to be cognizant and recognize the growth that we're experiencing, and that growth is expensive, right? And we need help. We need resources. So, you know, capping growth with SB 216 that comes at pretty significant consequence for us as we try to, you know, provide services to these new, 5,100 residents in the community. So that's the one thing that I hope is taken into account this year, is that we're growing and we continue to grow, and it's very hard just to stop growth. You can't just put a wall around the city and say, hey, no room in the inn this year. People are going to continue to come here, and so we're continuing to try to do more with less, which is hard. And so that would be the message, is be cognizant of the fact that we continue to grow, and we need to be good partners with the state and work together on welcoming these people that are calling Sioux Falls home.
To the question about density, the proliferation of townhomes would seem to suggest a demand for more efficient housing. Don't townhomes and things that multi sort of house-like residents help with that efficiency long term?
They do, and townhomes are increasingly becoming more acceptable as a entry into single-family home ownership. It used to be you move from apartment to single-family home, and now, unfortunately, the American dream of single-family home ownership is a little bit more challenging than it used to be. And a townhome it becomes an interstitial, a bridge that more people are finding is, I'm maybe not ready to get my own place, my own single-family home, but this is a cost-effective way, part of an HOA, don't have to maintain the lawn, scoop, all that stuff. And so we have seen an increase in the demand for that, and then the market has responded, and so we've seen more developers building those as a result.
And before I let that slip away, I just let it slip away. I'll remember. Who's got another question?
All right.
It was about townhomes. Sorry.
Hello, Anya Joseph, KLN News. My question is, which parts of the city saw the most permits, and are roads, schools, and utilities keeping up there?
Good question.
That's a good question. One of the unique things about Sioux Falls is we really grow in all directions. And Southeast has always been kind of the strong demand area. That's why we're putting in the additional infrastructure. One of the things I would say we've seen a lot of in the last couple of years is growth in the Northwest. A lot of that's been driven by Jefferson High School, and schools certainly do create that type of demand for housing around it. So that's really been probably the fastest growing area because it had been lagging for a while. And do we have enough schools, libraries? That's really a part of the effort that the planning department helps lead with, along with Public Works. We have representatives from Public Safety and Libraries here today. We have an internal team that looks at that every year. Where do we need to acquire land? Where are we thinking ahead? You have a conversation with Chief. He's always looking ahead where the next fire station will be. And as we develop land and develop our tier areas, we also look at those types of essential services that go with it. So certainly, it's a big part of our consideration as we grow.
So do you see a correlation or relationship between maybe a stable population and home ownership? I mean, we've had considerable growth, but is there any risk that as people continue to get locked out of the housing market or, home ownership, that they may look, I don't want to pick on, but look elsewhere nearby? And what's that relationship?
That's an interesting thought. And I guess I can see where you're going with that. I do think that first of all, housing it's a national issue. It's not just a Sioux Falls issue or a South Dakota issue. And the affordability and the gap between that, the demand, keeping up with it, particularly with the headwinds of the market the last few years with interest rates and price inflation and all that. So it's not just a here problem, right? So I think it's something we have to solve, certainly on our own, but also it's a national issue. With that said, I think we are doing what we can. I think we have a strong housing team. I think the one of the demonstrations of that is last year or year before when we did this affordable housing TIF in the northeast part of town. And we did an experiment that we're not sure was going to work, where we had small homes, slab on grade, and they've sold out because people have that clamoring of that they want that home ownership opportunity. So I think as long as we stay creative and respond to that, we will hold our own and certainly more than hold our own with the rest of the state and the rest of the area. But it is something you're always conscious of is housing, as the mayor opened with. It's a national topic, has been for 20, 30 years, and probably will be as we go forward as well. It's always kind of top of mind when you talk about what challenges that municipalities face.
Okay, so with housing in mind, if you do have some folks coming to Sioux Falls, families wanting to move to Sioux Falls, what is your suggestion to them? Hey, I want to start a family here. Should I be buying a home? Should I be renting? If they're looking at the next 10, 20, 50 years, what is your suggestion to them? And then the second question to that is for housing developers. What kind of conversations are you having with them? How are they changing their 25, 50-year plans as far as what their building processes look like and housing developments?
Right. You brought up the two pieces of the equation, right? The demand, the customer, and the builder, and where do they meet in the middle? And I think one of the things we've seen happen is another reason why some of the housing is the expectations that people have had, especially first-time home buyers, when interest rates were 2% and 3%, and they could get into this home and prices were a little bit lower. And so I think there's been some shift in that as well. And what does that look like? And now is my first home. And I was actually having this conversation with my kids over Christmas. What does a first-time home buyer look like? And they were talking about maybe it's a twin home or it's a townhome or it's something like that. They still recognize the importance of building equity. They still recognize the importance of how to build wealth traditionally. But they also, I think, are faced with the realities of price and availability. And then just the transitory nature of people today as they move around too. So my advice to them is what it's probably always been, is look at your options. We have a wide variety of stock. We have a lot of variety of options of sizes of communities with our neighboring towns, and find what's best for you. But I think we have a great market. We work very closely with the development community to plan out growth, and so that we can be efficient with it. They obviously are looking at the market all the time and what sells and talking to their customers. And so I think that process does kind of work itself. But it is good to be conscious of it. That's a good question.
With that in mind, do you know what the percentage is right now, or what is going to be homeowners compared to renters in Sioux Falls, and how you see that fluctuating?
So if you look back, and we actually just ran some statistics as we looked at our population estimates. For many years, that's kind of been a 50-50. And then when we saw, in fact, it was much higher, and then the crash of 2008, 2009 came, and then it kind of took a while to come back, but we had really built the single-family home inventory really high, and then the crash came, then it kind of went back to 50-50. And then we had COVID, and we had this rapid growth. We had, instead of the 2.5%, all of a sudden we were having 3.5% growth, 3.1% for a couple of years. And so that spiked the multifamily market. And so that really got us out of whack. Now we're kind of back to probably 60-40 multifamily, 55. We're getting close to that 50-50, but that's kind of where it is, has been.
All those trends together, to follow up on Angela's question, what are you seeing in terms of actual home values now in the last 6 months to a year? I mean, it's a big part of the property tax question, but are you seeing some downward pressure on overall housing costs?
When you talk to the realtors, downward pressure, it certainly flattened out the prices a little bit, and I think you are, but they're not getting the offers above and beyond. They're not getting 20 offers overnight. It's returning to a more normal. So I think that, yes, I think it's certainly slowed down the value, the growth, and the pricing of housing. I mean, it's not going to come back to where it was 10 years ago. But yes, the things that are going on right now, and the material costs, we're still seeing higher labor costs, and so that's affecting it, but that's kind of normal inflationary types of things. But yes, the short answer is the home prices have stabilized.
All right. Well, thanks for coming out today. We appreciate it. Have a blessed rest of your day.